of the Advertising and Media Committee, Jörg Vogelsang.
Thank you so much. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to IAB Europe's Virtual Programmatic Day H1 25. We are live broadcasting from vibrant London on a very sunny day. I'm afraid you cannot see that, but the view is really amazing. We're looking just right on the River Thames. That's really beautiful. And with that, I want to send out a very special and big thank you to our host, Rakuten Advertising, for hosting us in their stunning office. I mean, it's really, say that again, it's an amazing office, amazing view. Thank you so much. Perhaps a little bit of applause for our sponsor. Thank you. My name is Jörg Vogelsang. I'm Managing Director of True Relevance and Vice Chair of IAB Europe's Advertising and Media Committee. Together, we're here to unpack the latest trends of programmatic advertising, share groundbreaking insights, and drive the future of digital advertising across Europe. For those joining us the first time, IAB Europe is the unified voice of digital marketing across the continent. We bring together the national IABs, the federations and leaders from media, tech, and marketing to advocate, innovate, and collaborate, driving a responsible, transparent, and impactful industry. One of the ways to bring our industry together is by hosting events like this today here in London, connecting people from across Europe and bring them both virtually and in person together. So also our today's event is hybrid, so welcoming a live audience here in London, alongside with hundreds more tuning in from their screens. Having been a panelist myself, I'm absolutely thrilled to be hosting my third virtual programmatic day. I mean, it's really incredible to see how many people are showing up and joining us, both here in the room and online. We're really proud to say that this is one of the largest events in programmatic and digital advertising. And like many other virtual events, every speaker you're going to hear today is live here in the room and sharing real-time insights. So thank you for all of you taking your time out of your busy schedules and being with us today, whether you're here in person or on the screens sitting at your desk. Let's dive into this and get started. Today we have an exceptional lineup of moderators and panelists across 4 powerful sessions. I think you can see that on your screen and also behind me. We are kicking it off with the review key H1 learnings. So exploring the rise of omnichannel strategies across retail media, CTV, digital out of home and audio. Then unpicking the growing impact of curation, and finally examining how attention metrics are transforming media buying. Get ready for that and for a forward-looking day. Before we start, let me also spend, the next slide please, spend 1 minute for a short ad break on behalf of IAB Europe as a non-profit organization. Every speaker you hear about is a proud member of the IAB Europe. And we are incredibly fortunate to have such talented and really bright minds in our organization. If you're interested to learn more about how to participate or how your organization, your company can become a member of IAB Europe, you can just scan the QR code. I hope the people in the room at least can do that. And the people online can also reach out to Helen Moussard, our CMO, and can get some more information directly from the source. And we are, with this, nearly ready to kick it off. But before, I have a little bit of housekeeping to share with you. This event is live, but recorded, and we're going to send out the recordings afterwards to all the people who had registered. And you can also see a link to the recording on our website. So please have a look afterwards. I think it will take some days, and then you're going to see a live recording on the website. Another housekeeping rule for the people being on site, we have washing rooms outside at the lifts. If you want to leave this room, please pick up at the reception the key card so you can re-enter the whole kind of office. And with this, you can basically nearly kick it off. The people online, they can also ask questions. We want to have the people engaged. So there's a little QA box on the bottom of your screen. Please use it whenever you have a question, and we try to bake it into the whole kind of discussion. So now, before we dive into our first panel of the day, H1 learnings, H2 outcomes, the state of programmatic, I'd like to invite to our stage Emma Jowett, VP Northern Europe Sales at Integral Ad Science. This panel sets the tone for today's discussions with a fast-paced look at what moved the needle in the first half of the year, what had been barriers and blocks, and what is the outlook for the second half. A big round of applause to Emma. And a reminder again, use your Q&A box when you are online available. And with that, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jörg, and thrilled to be part of this event today. So I couldn't do this panel without some incredible panelists. So let me invite up Andrew Buckman, Chief Growth Officer at Azerion, Emma Newman, Chief Revenue Officer for Europe at PubMatic, Jason Wescott, Global Head of Commerce Solutions at WPP, and Mara Negri, CEO of EBX and VP of Marketing at Publieurope. Thank you guys for joining me today. Part one done. So I think everyone in this room online, we work in programmatic. We know how quickly this industry is moving. And I think what we're going to try and dig into in the next 20 minutes is a look back and a look forward to, you know, some of the biggest trends and that we're seeing in the industry, and maybe some future predictions of what we might think for the second half of the year. So without further ado, let's kick off. The IAB Europe's ADEX report concluded that digital advertising market grew by 16% in constant currency last year. Looking back, what expectations did you have for going into the first half of this year? And how are you tracking versus those expectations? I guess that's my first question. So Andrew, let's start with you. Oh.
Thank you very much. But on, yes. Okay, fine. So it doesn't.
Marvelous. Thank you. Yes, thank you. I love this kind of question because I can say what I was expecting and then say what I got, and I look like a strategic genius at the end of it. So, yes, so last year was strong, and we were expecting a strong H1. But not as strong, so a little bit sort of depreciating in terms of growth. More of a focus on ROI. Advertisers we thought were going to be a lot more cautious because of all the geopolitical tensions, because of the upcoming tariffs and uncertainty about what Trump was going to do to the global economy. And what we actually got was pretty much that. It was and I can only really talk to Q1 because we're a public company and we've only released our Q1 numbers, but you can probably take it as an indication of H1. We've had a relatively strong first part of this year. Retail media has been very strong. So we've seen that advertisers have been really focused on performance and on return on investment. And video has been good, mostly driven by CTV and BVOD. And we're really seeing brands and agencies asking us more for return on investment, engaging formats, and engaging campaigns that really show measurable success.
Great. Emma, does that echo kind of what you're seeing as well?
Quite a lot of it, yeah. I think that we went into the first half of the year quietly optimistic. I think it was, and I think we were justified to have that view. I think it was a year of, I've never done so much scenario planning in my life. So it was just like, is he going to say this? Is he going to say that? If he just says this, we do this. If he says that, we do that. So I had like 27 plans, I think, at one point. But similar to your point, I think that we thought agencies would, or brands would pull out of certainly branded advertising. And I think they did to some lesser or greater degree, but there's been a greater emphasis on performance-based advertising. And in fact, pretty much everything that we see now has a performance element, even in those channels where perhaps would be considered more branding. So CTV, for example, we're seeing a lot of performance asks from a CTV campaign. I also think that we've seen more of a shift out of the open exchange into more deal-based buying. Again, I think that's so that people are more confident about what they're buying, they have transparency on what they're buying. And we're seeing a shift, I think, to more compression of the supply chain. So people looking for working for sort of narrower supply chains, much more targeting on the supply side. But again, like you, we have public companies, so I'm not going to share stats, but you know, I ended the half relatively happy, and I'm feeling fairly confident about second half.
Do you want to go next?
Will do. Thanks.
Agency perspective.
Thanks, Emma.
please.
Yeah. So I'll speak more from an industry perspective. We put out twice a year, this year, next year, forecasts. There's a lot of great information out there within this report. Similar to Andrew and Emma, I was just like, my God, like, here we go again. Did you guys not learn the first time around? Like, it's been a crazy 6 months. Like it's an absolute roller coaster. I mean, we were forecasting the global advertising revenue to grow 7.7% at the end of last year for this year. We've downgraded that forecast in June to 6%. So that's come down quite.
That's all advertising,
dramatically.
not just digital.
All advertising, not digital. However, we're still seeing a very strong growth trajectory in digital. So we see at the moment pure play digital as about 73% share of advertising revenue globally. Now, if you add in things like digital out of home, connected TV, we call those the extensions, that takes it up to 81%. And we're expecting it by 2030 to be 87% share. So it's moving very much still with that aggressive trajectory towards a higher share for digital. But really interesting layer on top of that is that we looked at the top 350 brands for advertising, and their share, their digital share is actually 47%. So they're still doing a lot within the analog world. And then if we look at the digital share of all other advertisers, it's 80%. So I think that definitely tells a story there. I think from a programmatic perspective, it's really interesting. When I was at Interact in Brussels in May, Daniel Knapp was talking about the programmatic was a re-acceleration of growth, and that was 18.4% growth in programmatic for 24 versus 7.4% growth the previous year. So that's a huge uptick, you know, over double the growth rate. And I think it is that channel expansion now into more programmatic, the democratization of buying. That's what's really driving things. I think JC Decaux commented that they're seeing a big uptick in programmatic digital out of home. I think digital out of home accounts for 41% of out of home ads, and they're seeing a big uptick in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, for example, and then, you know, similar trend on CTV as well.
Well, I was going to ask you about given the consumer changes in terms of consumer behaviors, how is you seeing the impact on your business, given you're in the CTV space?
We are lucky enough because we are on the CTV BVOD business, and of course the growth is driven by this consumer shift. So we ended 2024 in a very good position, and we were expecting 2025 to be similar. And I have to say H1 is in line with our expectations. Consumer shift, but also the platform evolving, because all the broadcasters are also changing the offer, and it's becoming more and more available in programmatic. This was not the case a couple of years ago. We also see the first broadcaster giving access to linear to be both in programmatic. So this is, from our point of view, will boost even more the investments in the second part of the year.
Okay. And in terms of, you mentioned scenario planning, multiple scenario plans. Do you think the second half is going to require that kind of agility in the same way as H1? Do you want?
I think the reality is that the environment within which we all work is going to require agility regardless, and it's almost become the new normal now. I think where we are seeing a level of, I guess, stability is in the channels that people are choosing to buy. So video in pretty much all of its formats, CTV and BVOD particularly. We've done a lot of work recently with broadcasters in helping to educate them about how do you actually take that linear spend, because it's not a natural. I think there's been an assumption that the linear money will just follow the consumer to the BVOD platform. And in fact, that's not the case. The linear money is leaving the linear platform. Some of it is going to BVOD, but quite a lot is going to social. Quite a lot's going to search. A lot of it's going into retail media. So, you know, how do we help make sure that that sits within that ecosystem? So I think there will be some consistencies, and we will see certain trends continue to evolve. Retail will continue to grow. CTV and BVOD will continue to grow. Dual-based buying will continue to grow. I think there is some uncertainty around maybe some of the more traditional programmatic platforms, such as mobile web and that kind of thing. So I think that's where the uncertainty is going to lay.
And Andrew, you mentioned, you know, everything's about driving performance and delivering outcomes for advertisers, obviously, in this, when everything when every dollar counts. How are you seeing that manifest itself in the second half of the year and your outlook, you know, for 2026?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, Emma. Sort of, there's almost no campaigns now which don't have some performance element in them today. So every branding campaign, attention is no longer enough. You have to have awareness in there, and brand lift and consideration, and ideally something that shows measurable success further down the line. So whether that's in terms of store visits or purchases or downloads, depending on what you've got. So everything that we can do that links up a brand's CRM with the campaigns that they run is what we're looking at focusing on. Without us being a retail media player per se, we're also seeing what can we do to support retail media. So we do that very much in the way of things like media and data and creative packages that help drive measurable sales, and formats that are both sort of highly engaging and potentially shoppable or at least interactive, and really push to being able to help advertisers get a proper measure on the return of their ad spend.
Yeah, I have to say, from an IAS perspective, you're right. Before it was about how do I avoid bad stuff. Now it's about how do I take media quality and make sure that that's a core principle within my media buying and my strategy, because it's the number of times I hear advertisers now saying we don't want to buy cheap reach. It's about buying better quality inventory, because ultimately that will drive the performance that we're being asked to deliver with our media budgets. Mara, from your perspective, do you think this shift to CTV is happening as quickly as we may have predicted in terms of the investment?
I think
And what needs to happen?
what we are gonna focus on H2 is really, I think, is a matter of education as well. So the market is really complex, fragmented, and diversified. So from our point of view, to drive more investments and more clients to BVOD platform is really explain what is the difference on the video landscape today in the market. So you see very different prices, but it's also very different KPIs and outcomes. So this is for us a clear focus for H2, building documents that help this to be clear client side, especially in programmatic, because historically the price is a very important KPI and we are expensive. So sometimes clients say, no, thank you, you're much more expensive yet, but you should consider why. And then in terms of shift is also because we work on the pan-European international investments. So what is key is also being easy to buy cross markets. So in terms of strategy, we are trying to accelerate being more international. So if a clients want to buy Europe, you should be able to buy in an easy way, like on YouTube, on Google, on Netflix, on other platforms. So that's the challenge, I think, where broadcasters historically are very strong locally. But if they want to compete with global OTTs, they need to be a bit more international.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that notion of automation, I think we talk about outcomes in terms of the KPIs and the ROI, but from an agency perspective, how important is like, where does that fit into your, you know, conversations with advertisers? Are they looking for more efficiencies from their partners?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's not enough to kind of set and forget and just checking on things every kind of couple of weeks. You know, we have the technology at our disposal now to be able to keep in tune with the performance and look at results in real time and use custom algorithms, you know, to actually update and optimize the campaigns, which is really important. I think Mara makes a great point around making things easy to buy. And again, it's something I pointed to earlier within the democratization of access. I think about a month ago, Uber announced that they were making their journey ads available via a range of DSPs. I think they entered into a partnership with Google Ads Manager, and that could make, you know, what is, you know, traditionally just available through an Uber interface. I think powered by Curation probably in that case, but yeah, you could be bought through the Trade Desk, DV360 or Yahoo. So that's really important. I think the dynamic of partnerships, bringing things into play that you wouldn't necessarily expect either, like the Roku and Amazon DSP deal, which, you know, I didn't kind of see on the cards, but that's really, really interesting. And, you know, definitely just throws a new dynamic into the mix when you've got, you know, a big sort of player so vertically integrated like Amazon across all of the different channels that they operate in, you know, getting more into, you know, US living rooms through a partnership with a big broadcast player. That just shows a really, really interesting dynamic. So yeah, I think Andrew raised a really, really good point around, you know, performance and people expecting, you know, advertisers expecting that performance and everything having a performance edge now. And that's what's really, really important for us to deliver, because, you know, one, I think when the economic outlook is a little bit more uncertain, you know, every dollar spent is going to be under more heavy scrutiny. And there's an allure with digital and programmatic, you know, because of the measurability of it. And, you know, when you've got like the iron, we call it the iron grip of procurement in terms of, you know, setting things up on the client side, if we can offer those outcomes and that measurability and to some degree, some certainty with it, that's what advertisers are looking for.
Yeah, you're right. And so is the agentic future the answer to everything, Emma, Andrea? Like, what's your POV on that? We couldn't have a panel without.
I wondered when
that
AI was
discussion.
going to come up. And I was wondering whether I was going to be the first person to worrying that I'm the first person about it. So I think there's two things. If I think about the future, and we're talking about the next 6 months, so I think there's two things. One is definitely AI, but AI in terms of full funnel measurement. So making sure that you can actually run a campaign and measure both the top and the middle and the bottom of the funnel. And then choosing partners that can provide that level of insight and transparency and reporting, as well as real-time optimization of campaigns, real-time planning, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's definitely going to be part of the second half of the year. I also think the other thing that there's going to be a consolidation trend. I mean, I think we talk about consolidation all the time, but if I think about the CTV space specifically, and maybe it's not consolidation, it's more partnerships, people that traditionally have been enemies, for want of a better phrase. So TFN and Netflix have just announced a partnership. Who would have put money on that? Probably not me, if I'm honest. But, you know, they're understanding TFN is great at premium content for France, and Netflix has got a fantastic video on demand platform. So come together and, you know, you both win. You've had the relationship with Sky, Channel 4 and on ITV, really thinking, how do they compete against, you know, there's a lot more money out there that TV doesn't get. So how do they come together and use technology to bring new money into the marketplace? You know, you've got Disney and Amazon, again, not natural bedfellows potentially, but you think about, well, you've got the data and you've got the content, and that makes perfect sense. So I think we'll continue to see, I'm not sure if it's consolidation, it's more partnerships.
For the greater good, I think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think there's going to be a lot more consolidation, a lot more partnerships, and at every level. I mean, we see ourselves as a consolidator on the smaller level of deals than Disney and Amazon, for example. But still, we think there's still a lot of fragmentation, so there's a lot of space for consolidation. So we see, I'm anticipating more pressure in H2 this year from advertisers that need better return on investment, from more and more competition and focused competition in space, particularly in CTV, and retail media in itself becoming more and more mature. So it becoming much more of a natural path to market for most advertisers. And then the agentic AI side, we're investing quite heavily in that as well at the moment. I think, as probably most people are, there's not a single presentation that we give that hasn't got at least one AI slide on it. But what we're seeing it more on the agentic AI side is the ability for us to make our tools more accessible. So if anyone in this room started their career as a trader or an ops executive, you'll know that the first month of your career is probably the most boring month of your career, because you spend it in front of countless videos learning all the different DSPs and all the different SSPs and figuring out what drop-down menu to choose and what button to press. And the agentic AIs now help you use natural language just to say, I want a campaign for BMW in the southwest of France for 45 to 60-year-old professionals, and it'll go out and do it and do the whole media plan for you. So we think that's going to be good in terms of making these kind of tools more accessible. And a whole other debate, which Dom and I were talking about earlier on, is how do people coming into the industry actually start to learn these habits and techniques for advertising and stuff. But I think that's probably the makings of
For another
panel.
day. Yeah, that 20 minutes has just flown by. So quick fire answer. What is your top tip? If it's all about outcomes, ROI, what's the top tip or bit of advice, learning that you can leave the audience with? Each one of you gets a shot at this question.
Okay, that one was on the list. So top tips. So outcomes are definitely not table stakes anymore. So make sure that there is a performance element in everything that you do, and that you can measure how that performance impacts the campaign.
Thank you.
I would say write your brief properly so that the people, just saying, write your brief properly so that the people who are responsible for delivering your outcome actually know what they're trying to deliver.
I think that's a very fair point.
I've felt the pain on that one. For me, it's just commit with no compromise. I think quite often outcomes are a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more challenging to bring about, but they're so worth it if you actually leverage, data points that are out there, use more technology to bring about more of an automated result, and really dial up that outcome, but commit to it and don't cut corners around it.
Fair point.
And on my side, maybe is really be sure you are comparing apple to apple. So today we still have problem in measurement. So I think until the moment where we won't be able to measure cross-device impact or total audience, total campaign results, I think it's important to read your plan and making sure you are comparing in the right way your results.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And from my perspective, a little bit echoing what you said, you've got data that can tell and support decision making and planning. So let's make sure that you're using it. It shouldn't be tick box data anymore. It's actionable. It needs to be actionable. Thank you so much, amazing panelists. Handing back to Jörg, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Emma, and a big thank you also to all the panelists sharing lots of really interesting and insightful and also actionable insights. And with that, we are shifting our focus a bit. We already talked about some channels and multi-channel and cross-channel, but now we're talking about omni-channel advertising. please welcome Dory, Senior Manager Sales at Rakuten Advertising, who will be moderating our second session. And again, thank you so much for hosting us in this amazing kind of surrounding. This panel will explore how Programmatic is basically driving innovation across all the different channels and combine the different channels, make it a real omni-channel kind of experience, hopefully. And again, to the people sitting in front of a screen, please don't forget submitting your questions via the Q&A box. And with that, I hand it over to you, Dory.
Thank you. Very good to have everyone in the room today. I want to introduce my three panelists today. If they could come up, please. So first up, we have joining us from Sportradar, we have Ralf. Ralf is the VP of Product, leading product teams to support Sportradar's sports-centric omni-channel platform. Ralf is also responsible for transforming sports into data-rich, addressable moments for brands across platforms such as search, social, and programmatic. It's great to have you here, Ralf. Ralf has come over from Germany today, so give him a round of applause if we could. Next up, we have Tom Peruzzi, who is the spokesperson of the management board for Virtual Minds, which belongs to ProSieben Sat.1 Media SE. Tom is responsible for the strategic direction and development of the platform's portfolio. Thank you. Tom is also a renowned digital technology expert, mentor, and lecturer. So I'm very lucky to have you here today, and hopefully people will be able to pick your brain after the session or on the questions. Give a round of applause, please. And last, but certainly not least, we have Charlie Brookes, who is the Director of Digital at Bauer Media in the UK. He's responsible for spearheading the digital offering, plus he leads Audio XI, which is the new product aggregating Bauer's first-party data into audience-led commercial solutions. He is also from Stilton, which is a nice town in Cambridgeshire, famous for blue cheese. So
and doesn't have a blue jacket. Forgot his blue jacket.
Everyone, welcome, Charlie. Thank you guys for coming in today. It's a pleasure to have you. So jumping straight into our topic today, which is omni-channel programmatic. The first question I have for you is, with CTV, digital, out of home, and all the platforms that we sort of went into in the first discussion, what opportunities do you see these emerging channels bringing specifically for publishers? And next question is sort of, how do you think publishers can win in these areas effectively? If we can start with Charlie.
I've got the mic, have I? So I like Jason's point that some of this is the extensions. I'm going to call myself the extension. But yeah, I think it's really, really important. His summary was really, really helpful to lead into this, because clearly there's a lot of money being spent in this space, and I think publishers have to innovate and work out how they can play in that space. And then the other point that was made by the rest of the panel, particularly Andrew, about performance is also another key point. So at Bauer, certainly having 3 different media channels is really, really advantageous, and working out how you can use those together, how you can make it performance related. Certainly in audio, to give you an example, we know that audio works when people hear ads, but being able to then retarget people because you've pixeled them across the Bauer estate means you can get some performance information out of that and help advertisers with that feedback loop that was being discussed in the previous panel. So certainly having multi points, and particularly that data that we capture, whether it's contextual data or logged in data or any form of data that you have, bringing it into one place and powering your media solutions, I think is really key.
So thank you. And Tom, if we could hear your insights in terms of the broader omni-channel perspective.
Yeah, it's quite tricky currently because he said some more or less everything. No, but no, the thing is, what we shouldn't forget, especially from the publisher perspective, is there's more or less to the two sides of the coin. On the one hand side, we often think omnichannel with regards to the DSP business. On the other hand side, we can think, and I think the panel with Curation will take that into account later, that we can think about a little bit more omnichannel on the publisher side, because mostly a publisher doesn't have one channel only. They do not only have display or whatever, or CTV, the mostly multi-channel TV houses or multi-channel publishers and stuff like that. So you have to take that into account, that not only the advertiser has to deal with the different flavors of KPIs, with the different flavors of how to measure, what to measure. Is it more brand performance? The panel before had a really good discussion on that already, but it's really about the question, who owns the omnichannel in that game in the future? Will it be the publisher with Curation or anything else? Or will it be the demand side platform as we are more or less used to it? And that's one aspect at least we should bring in on a technical level as well, because both sides have to face the fact that one-to-many channels and one-to-one channels, they count differently. You have to measure them differently. They behave differently. But at the end, you want one experience for the advertiser and you want one experience for your customer.
Thank you. And we talked a little in the earlier panel around sort of the sell side consolidation, publishers kind of partnering, I suppose is the right word. But as sectors like retail media, CTV, audio, digital out of home, etc., grow, do you think that we're going to see sort of a rise in more of these walled gardens, or perhaps do you see an alternate model taking more of a hold? Maybe we could start with you down there, Ralf.
Yeah, happy to do so. I think first we could start discussing what is a walled garden and who is a walled garden these days, right? And that's probably where consolidation starts. You see certain acquisitions happening these days, people trying to get closer, especially in the out-of-home space or audio space, creating some, well, premium access to audiences, quality of supply there. Our side, like picking up on the first question, is like when we look from an advertiser's perspective, especially around sports fan, that's what we focus on, is trying to build a holistic experience for a fan. If you think about like on the consolidation piece, working with partners that address audio, out of home, display, CTV all together. As a sports fan, you might waking up, I mean, it's Wimbledon in town. I mean, if you're into tennis, you probably wake up reading about Sinner's game last or yesterday, what happened there. And you listen to a podcast, you get maybe to the grounds and you see you have opportunity to see out of home ads. So there's a lot of consolidation happening there on this side, and there's more opportunity to come to bring this closer together, in my opinion. And it's quite interesting to see also how do you get the message aligned across all of these channels.
And Tom, do you want to take the next that question?
Yeah, I really like that question about what a walled garden is, because if you say we know those Googles and stuff like that, often seen as a walled garden, but if we assume that in the value chain, there is someone who owns more or less the whole value chain or can have heavy impact on that, so that you somehow have to rely on this entity, then a few more companies will pop up being walled gardens. And this is something we for sure have to consider, because we often talk about the open web, but with all the consolidation ahead of us, it's always the question, how much open is open when we consolidate like hell, and then we create more and more of those. At least, maybe it's in walled gardens, maybe it's fenced gardens, but something everyone tries to protect his own home turf.
Thank you. And Charlie, what in terms of, I guess, from, when you think of the mindset of a buyer, what sort of advice or challenges perhaps do you see in the sense of consolidation for some platforms, but also that education piece around the different channels that you have perhaps across, out of home audio, etc.?
Yeah, I don't claim to be a buyer, so I've got to be a little bit cautious here what I say. I imagine their world is very, very complex, and understanding that ecosystem gets more complex because of the measurement issues that we're all well aware of. I guess it certainly ties into the walled garden conversation. If you forget gardens, it's basically about IDs, isn't it, and stitching data together. Certainly from a publisher perspective, trying to imagine how that audience can be curated, especially as a company like Bauer has such a strong brand heritage. It's now understanding how you take that trust of those brands and the engagement of those brands, but give a buyer the audiences they're looking for, because their customers aren't talking to them in any other language other than audiences. So we've got to be able to curate them at scale and understand how they move around that ecosystem and be sympathetic to our part in it as a publisher. I hope I haven't offended any people who buy me.
And that sort of leads nicely on to the next question is I suppose, what do you see as the state of measurement across these channels? And And then second part to that, what do you think in your eyes in terms of perhaps from a publisher perspective, what gaps need to be filled in order to realize that full potential?
Am I going again?
Ralph, let's start with you.
So yeah, measurement omnichannel. I guess, I mean, we're looking into this for many years right now. There's no holy grail on doing this so far. I think there are a lot of challenges. There are different currencies in the industry. Every channel, maybe even every walled or fenced garden, doesn't allow tracking certain KPIs and so on and so forth. So is there a solution to really measure it today? Probably not. Are there like maybe proxies getting closer to it? Yes, there are companies trying to solve more. We just heard AI is probably solving this going forward. I have a big question mark on this one, if that actually is going to happen. But nevertheless, what you can do, especially omni-channel, like, and we hear and we see this with our advertisers as well, more and more focus on performance, overlaying the classic like brand advertising channels out of home, CTV, TV, and bringing this all together, overlaying this maybe with a geographical layer, psychographical layer, and then making this all visible. You see where performance is happening in certain geolocations across certain channels. That's quite interesting. And then, I mean, for us, we collect 300 million data points per day on sports. Seeing where certain activities, Wimbledon, soccer, like we have the Club World Cup in the US happening or having happening, bringing this all together and then putting it nicely over each other. And then you need a certain piece of AI, but I don't think we will solve this anytime soon.
It's tricky to always answer as the second person, and especially after the first panel, because they touched measurement too. But let me maybe dig a little bit deeper on that. And the thing is, first of all, we have different channels with different metrics, with a different understanding. Maybe some are more used to be branding channels, others are the typical performance channels. They all come closer to each other. And there's the acceptance that just by them coming closer to each other, there must be the one KPI that matches them all. Maybe we haven't found that KPI yet. Most likely it will be some outcome-driven KPI, but maybe we still have to dig deeper into that. Maybe it's the reason because we don't see all the signals, because especially larger platforms or social platforms, they don't want us to see everything. But it's not only social platforms, honestly. There's a lot of publishers out there not wanting to share their signals and more or less own the truth of what's happening on their platform. So maybe this is one thing. The second thing is there always a need to compare one-to-many channels with one-to-one channels. We've seen that when we have built the media manager, which allows that you do traditional linear TV, the broadcasted TV advertising, do it programmatically. The first thing is that they asked for traditional performance KPIs, but still it is a one-to-many media where you spread it over, they broadcast and air it, and then you are in the more or less traditional TV world. So there is a lot of education to be done. And at last, and I think that we see that more and more, we've seen it, for example, in the TV space in Austria. For sure, it's a smaller country. You could say that maybe it's a little bit easier if you act in a smaller country, but the TV houses, the agencies and large advertisers were sitting together for 2 years and thinking about how the currency of the future should look like in order to be digital, true digital, throughout all kind of video on the one hand side, and to be real time and fit into the existing frame which everyone is used, so that you don't have to change the whole chain. And it worked out. So there is positive examples out there, I would say, going into the right direction.
Yeah, and so you talk about the education piece, and I think that's one really, really important element for us as publishers to sort of make sure we're educating the right people and going to the various buyers and agencies to sort of give them the layout of the land. I guess from a publisher perspective, maybe Charlie, you can answer this one again. But I guess with the fact that there is that measurement gap across the different channels, across, you know, the way that you report versus your competitors report, how would you, you know, from a publisher perspective, be able to navigate those conversations and to sort of have a really, I suppose, a solution to those, you know, hesitations or those questions that you get from various buyers for each of those individual channels?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got to know what your medium does and what part it plays. Probably swim in your lane. Bauer has multiple touch points, so it can add those together, which is an advantage. But I think most people who are buying media still understand the value and the supply funnel and the way they work. It works differently if you're a car manufacturer to a retailer. So again, understanding who you're talking to, what you're talking to them about, whether the point about get the brief right. If you understand what the person's trying to achieve and you understand your medium, you can help people with that. And we have plenty of measurement tools that look at the products that we produce, and we openly and transparently share them with people. But I think it's hard for any media owner to say that they can represent everything, and understanding your part in that audience buy, I think, is probably the primary objective.
Brilliant. So we've touched on opportunities for publishers with the so the emerging channels like retail media, CTV, digital out of home, the shifting market structure, and some of the ongoing challenges with measurement. What would your advice be for, I suppose, for companies looking to sustain this momentum of growing in emerging channels for the remainder of 2025?
Surely you've got to let Tom answer first.
No, I'm not prepared for that. No, you always have to jump into that for sure. If you go into a new channel, everything may be new. It may look a little bit similar to what you have seen in the past already, but in order to understand, you have to run a campaign, for example, and simply understand the mechanics behind, and then think about how you do it, and not waiting for nice PowerPoint slides, because we all ad tech intermediaries and all publishers, they're used to produce nice PowerPoint slides for sure. So really go into it and ideally have the time, spend some time with the new channel, think about how does it best support my brand, because at the end it's about your brand. It's not about, hey, I've done a digital out of home campaign. It's not a Me Too thingy. It's really about what kind of channel with that certain metric, which I can use as of today, how does it best support my brand? How does it best support my goals within the marketing team? And then go forward, but don't wait for Google or anyone else explaining you how you have to do that.
Yeah. Adding on top of this, maybe, truly understand the channel, what's capable and possible to do in a channel, from measurement to like, how does an audience engage with these type of channels. Understand maybe we are here with the IAB standards, right? So what is in there, especially if it's programmatic, like what is the data points that you actually can access and not, so that you're not buying too much snake oil, because there's a lot out there, and truly understand what can be done and what couldn't be done, and then try to connect, especially the messaging across these channels. If you're running an omni-channel campaign, make sure it ties all in together. I think these are the two things I would like to give on.
Thank you, guys. Do we have any questions from the audience? Pick their brains. Online? Yeah. I think we've got about 9 minutes to spare. Yes.
It's probably not best for us because there's no longer here.
I just wanted to know, look, retail media networks have got incredible first-party data, right? But with every retailer becoming a media company now, how do you ensure scale without sacrificing performance and audience quality?
I'm just picking it up, and
we avoid that whole walled garden thing.
No, I think there will automatically happen some kind of consolidation. We've seen it already. If I take, for example, Germany, there are a lot of large retailers. They started quite enthusiastic with what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve. They've built large organizations, and it was really solid work. But then they figured out that you need to have real size, otherwise you're still a niche player in the whole digital world. And what we see too now is that there come up more and more, how would you call it, retail media aggregation services, which try to unite different smaller retailers, offer them a tailor-made solution on ad tech, so that you can do all the basic retail media thingy. but they don't have to build up everything from their scratch on the one hand side. On the other hand side, they collect the reach which they need in order to be relevant so that you can really target it appropriately. And I would say you will see more and more of those consortia or aggregators popping up in all different countries.
So therefore, we're still turning to a point of someone else throwing it. Right. So there's a lot.
That's a tricky question to answer. Why does it mic stay with me? You know? It will stay a little bit a lottery for the next 12 to 18 months, but then things will get consolidated. And I have to say, we use the word now the second time, I guess, and with the help of AI, maybe it is 12 months and not 18.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm the chair of the Retail and Commerce Media Committee. No, I'm good. I done my bit. I just thought it was a good question to come in on, and I absolutely agree. And we're actually, it was funny. I'm sat next to Emma because we've done some great work with PubMatic around working directly with retailers in order to be able to offer those audiences in a more democratized way. So that way you can still activate everything within a chain where you can get a closed loop on attribution. So it doesn't become a lottery whatsoever, but at the same time, you're still democratizing that access. It's very timely as well. If I talk about, WPP Media, formerly Group M, and the acquisition of InfoSum, and I feel like, in general, privacy enhancing platforms will play a big role within this because they make the retailer, the retailer's number one commodity from a retail media network perspective is their data. Despite what they might think about, how good or bad their tech platforms are, their data is what's really, really important and what makes this tick. And they're clearly very, very protective about that. So if it can be accessed in a way that doesn't compromise on privacy in any way whatsoever and actually enhances the privacy, then we're in a really good spot. But it's still early days.
Thank you very much. Lots of future-facing statements, so lots to unpack. Specifically on the doubt regarding cross-channel measurement, you mentioned a lot of walled gardens now making KPIs available that are quite crucial to facilitating this. Can you imagine any kind of situation in which such disclosures would be in their best interest from like a market structure perspective?
I mean, there's lots of scenarios you could imagine, aren't there, in that one, and that we could be here for a while. I mean, I guess the democratization point is probably what everyone's looking for. How you do is difficult. The InfoSum clean room stuff, I think, is probably one route, and certainly using it to give analysis and insight. If we're here to help advertisers achieve their goals, that insight and that analysis is what everybody's trying to do. No one wants to give their secret sauce away either. So it's how do you find that balance between getting the best possible outcomes whilst maintaining your information, your knowledge, your data. So I think it could and should evolve. How it evolves is complex, which is why this subject goes round and round and round. But I think it has got a lot better in the last 5 or 6 years, in my opinion.
I think even if they are not opening up, I mean, there are more and more initiatives, especially like companies opening up their MMM models on an AI basis. So the more data that becomes available, maybe there are insights which channels might be working and which not, or like to what extent they are working. But that being said, that requires a lot of campaigns, a lot of data, a lot of spend, a lot of insight, and then it still stays somewhat siloed with the advertisers that are spending.
I have to say one I don't want to say I want to defend the big platforms. That's definitely not true. Everyone who knows me would start smiling now. But there's one thing, what we often see somehow that those big platforms, they've one big advantage because they can blur those KPIs and they can say, this is how it is, take it or leave it, and you still buy, and that's only one thing really good, and that would be really nice sometimes for our publishing customers as well, because then you can get out of that cherry picking, and I used to get it like that for the last 30 years, and simply build a new model underneath it, and then become more and more transparent again. If this would be the idea behind hiding first and then opening it up again and again to change the underlying model, then I would be fully okay with it. It doesn't look like that. That's the problem.
Thank you. Still on time. We good? Well, another question?
Of course.
Don't give it
You have the tough questions.
That's all right. This is an easy one. So representing a lot of facets here from the world of Omnichannel, I just want to know, what was the last great ad that made you actually do something, and what platform was it on?
My problem is I'm a sucker for advertising. I've always loved it. So yeah, I'd buy anything. There's a lot of boxes unopened, but yeah, basically because I am so clearly into sport and outdoors, I keep getting sold new things. Always prepared to try them. Got a new pair of trainers the other day that work brilliantly. And the only problem now, of course, is that I keep being asked to buy them again and again and again and again. So I think that would be the only downside is you've got me now. Stop. Oh yeah, I mean this was a good old fashioned. This was a good old. What were they called? The brand or the type of ad?
Trigger made you go, yes. Was it like even?
Yeah, I mean this was easy. I was on a running site and I got a good old fashioned MPU for a pair of running shoes, and I like the video and the guy wearing them. So you got me, but it wasn't particularly sophisticated.
Actually, it was also an MPU on a site, which is, I mean, everyone talks about like it's not working, but actually it worked. It was shopping, like not shoes, but like trousers, because I needed some for an event, and they looked nice and cool, so I shopped them. So they still work. Yeah, maybe we're still into MPUs. Yeah.
You're not going to admit to it.
I was just thinking about, my family hates me for not switching the TV channel when there's ad break, because there's so many interesting, funny, creative, emerging, impressive ads. And I would say, you read all the books, you work in that area, you know what's happening to you, and still you like it, and ultimately you do it does something with you.
Nice. Thank you, everyone. If that's all the questions we have in the room, then thank you so much for my panelists today. If you have any other questions, obviously submit them online. We can get back to you after the event.
Thank you, Dory, and thank you to the panelists. Big thank you to all the questions, of course, and pretty insightful to hear about your ad confessions, I would call it. So we see that actually we don't even need necessarily all the fancy new stuff to make things work. Digital advertising is obviously way more, how should I say, efficient and effective than we sometimes think about this. So now we're changing gears again. Up next, we shift the focus and talking about a new thing, which is perhaps not so new, which is curation. I mean, we see that signal loss, and we heard about this already, is accelerating throughout our industry. At the same time, advertisers want to have more demand, and they definitely want to have premium demand, CTV and all these kind of things we heard about. So perhaps curation is one solution to this kind of question. And welcome with me, Marie-Claire Puffett, Industry Development and Insights Director at IAB Europe, who will moderating our third session on curation. A warm welcome.
Thank you, Jörg. I think we might need an extra chair. I think I get the prize for the largest panel today. So yeah, I'm going to welcome my panel. We have Filippo, who is co-CEO of OneTag. We have Frank Schofield, Director of Enterprise Sales and Commerce Media for EMEA at Magnite. Matt Adams, who is Regional VP of Media and Ad Tech at Microsoft Advertising. You've all got such big job titles. Sarah, who is Director of Marketplace Operations at Index Exchange. And Stephanie, who is Senior Director of Demand Sales at Comcast Advertising. So 30 minutes, one of me, 5 of you, curation. I'm not a curation expert, but I'm hoping in the next 30 minutes I will become one. So Jörg said curation is not necessarily new. I happen to agree. I think, we've talked a long time in our industry about PMPs and, deals. So I think we are potentially relabeling it, but you tell me if I'm wrong. So let's kick things off. Let's talk about what is curation, how have they evolved, and why is it so important right now? Why is it gaining traction with advertisers? I don't know. I think you have the microphone at the end there, Filippo. So do you want to kick off? One mic between 5 of you. So
yeah, absolutely.
Listen.
So curation. Our definition of curation is pretty straightforward. Is the intelligent selection of media and data with an optimization that happens in real time for better outcomes. That's pretty much how we define it.
Why is it gaining ground right now?
Because again, we are entering more an efficiency area, an area of outcomes. So there's more focus on that side. So curation, if done right, if it's done through infrastructure, if it's done through an algorithmical approach, it's not just a linear traditional packaging of domains and data. It has to happen in real time. So right now there is a technology that can actually provide that type of a solution. And again, if done right, it can reduce fees, it can reduce inefficiencies, and ultimately can provide better outcomes. And I think outcomes are important if they put in the context of quality. So quality with outcomes, they go together, because an outcome by per se could just mean a click in a bad environment. So that's also something that we want to consider.
Frank, do you agree with Filippo's definition?
Yeah,
well, no.
We'll get off to a flying start. Yeah, no, I definitely do. I think, like you say, sell-side decisioning is something that's been around for a very long time. I think maybe giving the power of that to the buyer is something that's really risen, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about curation. In terms of what the buyer wants, it's still control, transparency, ROI. Like, that hasn't really changed through the whole, my whole career in programmatic, really. The way you do that is just get the decisioning as close to the supply as possible and try and cut out as many of those kind of intermediaries that maybe aren't adding as much value. And it's something that Magnite's always kind of focused on, is that direct integration with publishers, rather than, having SSPs buying from other SSPs and having this quite kind of convoluted system. And really that's what's going to simplify it. And that is kind of the benefit of curation, for sure, as we see it.
Matt, do you agree? Do you think this is going to lead to a more simplified ecosystem, or are we complicating things even more?
I think there's a risk of all of us pretty much agreeing on this topic, which is always fun and nice. We're all friends here. But yeah, so I mean, at Microsoft, I had the pleasure of being part of the Xandr acquisition, and was in that business previously. And we actually launched our curation platform. I think it was way back in 2019 now, so it's been a while. And we have seen some shifts for sure. So I think when we first brought that platform to market, we had a big focus on what we call kind of asset monetizers, or kind of data businesses that were looking to essentially monetize their data assets, putting that on top of media deals, and then pushing that to end buyers within their DSPs of choice. I think the shift that, potentially these two alluded to was, more recently, we've actually seen the end buyers lean more and more into curation and start to actually try to build their own marketplaces themselves, so they can exert that kind of control over the supply chain, leverage, pricing, preferential rates, and, ultimately get more transparency into the buying decisions that they're making. So we think, brands building marketplaces and, buyers ultimately leaning into curation is going to be the real path forward. We actually think the sell side of the industry is where that innovation is really going to happen. And that's what's going to lead to, ultimately more consolidated supply chains and more efficient buying. I mean, at Microsoft, we're all in on the sell side and curation. We recently announced the deprecation of our DSP Invest. So, with a lot of other sell side kind of representatives here. I think, yeah, that's why we're going to be pretty aligned on this topic.
Sarah, I've heard a lot about transparency and consolidation. Do you agree?
I have to say, I do agree with all three of you. I think really across the board, we have seen the concept of sell-side decisioning becoming more popular, but it's ultimately helped like reshape the collaboration across the industry as well. We're seeing more collaboration from the supply side with our media buyers, the media owners, and our DSP platforms as well. And I think that's definitely key to continuing that evolution and ultimately making supply smarter from the start, as opposed to needing to apply everything on the DSP side. From my point of view, I think when it talks to, is this going to make the supply chain simpler? I think the answer is it can, if that's what the buyer wants. And I know we have a number of buyers who are actively looking at that today. And it's about working with partners who are transparent and are able to, like Index, provide information on where all of the fees are going within the transaction and allowing media buyers to make those decisions around where they should continue to invest and ensuring that their media spend is doing the most for them.
Definitely thoughts
to add to that.
Yeah, that's already quite a lot.
No, but honestly, when I was invited to come to the panel, I thought about like curation. I really had to think about it, and at the risk of sounding a bit weird, but curation has been around. And I think coming from a CTV world, free will being the answer of broadcasters and streamers, we've always been doing curation. But what has changed, and to your point, Filippo, is the intelligence added to every single impression that is evaluated in a different way to make it more valuable for the end buyer. And that's really where this shift has been coming from. Broadcasters, streamers wanting to make their inventory much more shoppable. And that comes with things like adding standard attributes to really add another layer. It's become more intelligent in a way, the way the curation has been done.
Well, it all sounds really positive so far, but there must be some challenges, right? And what does, thinking about the data that we need to make this work, has that increased enough? Has the supply of data increased enough? And as a result, does the value of publisher first party data go up or remain the same, or does it become a challenge for publishers? Like,
the challenge is now, if you stay in a siloed environment, publisher by publisher, there is a risk of getting too granular and therefore lacking scale. So that's where, as an SSP, and where you have the ability to package that type of inventory, where you get back to the scale. So in a way, yes, it can get too granular, and then you, as a buyer, you don't get the scale that you need. But if you work together, and what we heard earlier, broadcasters coming together, creating marketplaces for them to have much more power against walled gardens, for example.
So yeah, I think first party data is extremely important to kick it off with, whether that be publisher first party data or buy side and advertiser first party data and the likes of retail media, etc. It's going to become more and more important as we see more signal loss, as we've talked about earlier. I feel like saying cookies are going away is a bit like saying it's a year of mobile, but cookies are still actually going away, and they're slowly degrading, and their importance is also becoming less. So I think this is where, particularly on the supply side, because we see the full brunt of the full internet as an SSP, there is far more opportunity to overlay data and still get the scale, which I think is important. I think this is why curation on the supply side and on the sell side is becoming, a buzzword, and is why we're here talking about it today. And I think there's also many ways to do that. There is published first party data. There is, looking at the IAB's framework for curated audiences. There's other third parties creating their own registered taxonomies. And then I heard earlier someone mentioned custom algorithms as well. Index is partnering with custom algorithm companies to look at many different fields within the OpenRTB spec today to ultimately find the right individual impression opportunity for the individual advertisers. And I think that is very much like where we will see the innovation come from.
I think the one thing I would just add to build on that point actually is, in terms of activating data and extracting the maximum value from data, like there's a real efficiency point here as well. And, that also plays a little bit into the sustainability space. I think, in the modern world, it's not really viable for SSPs to be passing billions and billions of impressions over, or bid requests over to DSPs, and expect the DSP to comb through that and really, find that one user that buyer wants to target, right? So, by moving the decisioning to the sell side, you actually really reduce that kind of volume of requests that you're passing and enable buyers to only see the actual users that they want to target. We also know that all DSPs and SSPs are doing some level of filtering just because the volumes are just too big to listen to everything. So again, by only on the sell side exposing the things that buyers actually want to access, it means they're actually getting the full visibility into those users that they want to target and not having, a large part of their audience filtered out because of kind of efficiency algorithms and things. So yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well, so it's not, the sustainability narrative is hugely important as well. Like we can already measure and show that the carbon footprint is massively reduced when you're acting in this way, exactly as you say, Matt. I think also it's just down to like operational efficiencies. So like anyone who's worked like ops or ad ops or anything knows that there's a huge amount of troubleshooting involved in programmatic when you're just setting up basic deals. But the more that you are only sending the inventory that you want to buy, the more that you actually see, okay, we're filtering this out for this reason. So yeah, operational efficiencies, it's more sustainable, but I think, yeah, there's definitely a huge benefit, even just on that increase in scale, as we kind of mentioned previously as well, in terms of applying that data on the sell side.
I think I forgot the question, but
Yeah, me too.
No, I'm joking. I think everything has been already said, but a couple of points that I think are interesting also from our perspective. One is the element of being really complementary to what the DSP does. I think we started as a DSP actually, which is pretty unique as a supply side platforms actually. So we understand how difficult it is to understand what is good and what is bad. And to understand what is good, you need to buy something, to learn something. So the burn and learn approach is something that is not very efficient for a DSP, obviously. And I remember last year at Jones Media event in New York, Chris Kane was always talking about the importance of having fat pipes instead of having multiple thin pipes, which is one important element, but it's also important to have smart pipes in that sense, right? Because you could have multiple pipes that are not maybe huge, but if they are taking the supply in the right approach in terms of being really smart, how can they enrich every single impression with multiple data? First party data is definitely one. Semantic data or contextual targeting is another one, but also you can actually gather multiple raw data. You can make sense of the quality of the page, of the single placement, like for example, out to content ratio. So how cluttered is the page of the publisher, the time in view, how much the time people spend on a specific portion of the page, collecting GPIDs is another element. So all these type of signals actually made sense of them in real time is what actually makes a pipe really smart instead of just passing the inventory along. I think it's really important.
And just going back to the title of the panel, how to win with curation for publishers, what's the win here? What's the kind of upside?
I can say very briefly. I think I've been on the publisher side for many years, and I understand that every time that there is a new thing coming up, publishers get nervous because they tend to think about losing control, which I think it's definitely good to know about that. And I think there is a lot of education that still needs to happen in curation. So being open to have questions from the publishers and explaining what type of benefits. And I think explaining benefits also means explaining benefits with data. For example, we have seen an increase in bid density up to 40%. Bid density means more competition on a single impression, and more competition brings ultimately better prices for the publishers, which is roughly between 25 and 30% increase. Publishers can do curation themselves. Obviously, they can actually have the ability to tap into a curation platform and take advantage of that in order to promote their inventory with first-party data. So I think it's a matter of educating and making sure that there is a collaboration and transparency also in the way curation can bring value to the constituencies of the supply chain.
Frank, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think like that kind of fear of putting all of the or giving all of the control to the buy side is definitely something we've heard from publishers, but it has to be control on both sides, right? And the publisher also has control because it's ultimately always going to be up to them as to where their ads are sold and who are buying them. So that's really, really important. It's also about kind of transparency on both sides. So publishers can opt in or out of any marketplace that is being set up. So it might be a certain agency is being set up and they're keen for this, but they're not keen for, you know, some other kind of partner. So that's really important. I think it's also like a real opportunity for publishers to build out kind of that direct relationship with the buyer a lot more. And they might see that a certain inventory section is being bought by this particular marketplace that has been set up by a particular agency. And it's an opportunity to either, I don't know, review pricing or try and kind of amplify that audience that they're buying as well.
Yeah, this is potentially quite a straightforward answer, but you know, obviously us bringing buyers onto the sell side via curation just brings those buyers, which are the value creation point ultimately, you know, one step closer to the publisher, right? So it enables publishers to, you know, have more direct relationships, be closer to demand, and ultimately kind of, you know, exert more control, which reduces the risk of being disintermediated over open auctions and across multiple platforms. And you know, I think, yeah, if you're a publisher, you want to be as close to your buyers as possible, and that's what, you know, ultimately curation powers, I think.
This is going to be great. I agree with all of you, but I think the control element is really important, and with curation coming that step closer, it's really about the publishers also then having the control to add their value. Their value may be their first-party data, it may be rich media units or high impact units or shoppable units that we heard about earlier. And it's about them being able to do that with their rule set still in play. So that may be particular flooring or priority strategy or advertiser blocks. And the media owners having this control, I think is very key for how they're going to win. I think also, you know, publishers can lean in and they can collaborate with partners like such as Magnite and Xander here and OneTag to, you know, lean in and learn and ultimately, you know, choose a framework that they trust and ensure that they're getting the transparency that they need, and they're also seeing the innovation out of curation as well.
I forgot the question. No, but I could answer that one, which I agree. Control is one thing, making a single impression more valuable to the buyer. And I think that's probably the next question, which is what does it make it more valuable for a buyer? And we've heard from Emma about outcomes, which seems to be the other buzzword, and working media. It's becoming more and more difficult for marketers to really prove how each single impression works. And that's where this all comes together, and hopefully, do you want to say something? And hopefully we'll bring more ad revenue into those publishers with more sell-side decisioning.
I feel like we've just solved all of the industry's problems. Transparency on the buy side, control on the sell side, more valuable impressions. Like, is curation really the holy grail? Is it really the answer to all of this? Without putting playing devil's advocate.
I think it's you know, it's a fundamental shift in the industry. You know, I think the last big shift that we saw was header bidding, and yeah, there were good things and there were, you know, potentially maybe some not so good things that came out of that. But I think we're very much like, it's a big shift. I think we will continue to see innovation, which I think the key here is the innovation. So what innovation is this going to drive? And I think the answer is a lot.
Yeah, I think there's always a funnel or, you know, a towel of buyers. So, you know, I think curation definitely solves the problem for the premium end and large buyers, large brands who, have that data to activate and who, really want to lean into these kind of, sophisticated solutions. I think there'll always be a longer tail of advertisers that, probably will, do well to work with more kind of traditional ways of buying and more kind of open approaches. But yeah, for the kind of, large brand budgets and things, I think it's definitely, one of the ways we can solve a lot of the challenges we have today.
Yeah, down this end, it does get harder, doesn't it, as you get towards the end of the question. But no, I completely agree. I think like potentially a way you can open up that longer tail is if you do look at that data application across a whole range of supply. And because you're increasing the amount of scale, it means you're no longer just working with the publishers that have enough scale for their own data, right? And you can start to apply either an SSP's data like Magnite has our own, or it can even be a third party or whoever it is, and really start to open up the pool of inventory rather than just saying, right, I've got these publishers because I know I'm going to scale with them, but let's open it up to everyone that we've got available on that platform.
Felipe, do you have anything to add, or we could see if there's questions?
I only have one reflection, which is a bit broader. I was thinking about the future, right? Where things will, how things will play out in the future. I mean, we have a DSPs and the SSPs and that are typically representing two different sides of the same coin. Will everything go straight into being one platform doing everything? I'm not saying that it's going to be curation, because I mean, a few years ago, supply side platforms were kind of commoditized. Supply was commoditized. Now people are starting to say maybe that DSPs are starting to be more commoditized, especially for certain type of activations. So I think maybe there is a convergence happening in the market. So consolidation is happening across the board overall. But I think also in terms of, do we really need multiple platforms to do maybe certain type of campaigns? Maybe something more complicated like performance is needed. Maybe for something more straightforward like upper funnel campaigns, maybe one entry point could be better, more efficient in that sense. And there are obviously companies like the Trade Desk who have done some certain type of initiatives, others like PubMatic, and others who have done other type of initiatives to try to get closer to either the buyer or the supply side. I think this is an interesting trend in the market. So I don't have the answer, but I think it's interesting to observe how things will play out.
We have, oh, go on.
No,
Matt.
I think your comment is a really interesting point, actually. Like something I've heard is like people start talking about SSPs for buyers, right? Or building a buyer UI on top of an SSP, which is kind of an extension almost of curation or quite similar. But then the question then becomes, well, at what point is that UI a DSP, right? And, do we need both, and what happens there? And then agentic platforms, how do they play into that? So yeah, I think there's a lot.
I was hopeful we were simplifying things up until now. So now I feel like we've overcomplicated it again. Any questions from the audience? One over there. Go on.
Just before that, because we're hybrid, we have an online question as well. So we're going to prioritize a bit, and then I'm going to come back to you. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Let me just get to it. So outside of the agency ecosystem, do you see brands adapting curation as a tool to run campaigns?
Yeah, so we've seen quite a lot of interest from brand directs around the curation side, but I think they have quite different views to exactly what they're using curation platforms for. So I know obviously agencies are representing the brand, but often it will be their data that they're trying to bring into it and curate against, or it will be some sort of data partnership that they've got. I think for the brand, anyone that's speaking directly to the SSP normally has quite a developed programmatic team already, and they're really just going back to that transparency and control piece and being able to report on everything that's happening on the supply side, no matter the DSP they're using, has been a real kind of factor that they're kind of looking for as well.
Yeah, I would agree. At Microsoft, we've seen both. So, I think traditionally this kind of started, as I say, with kind of data owners and what we would call asset monetizers, but with buyers that are leaning into curation, definitely to begin with, large holdcos, big agencies were kind of setting up their own marketplaces to, build products and solutions to sell to all of the brands they represent. But we have more recently seen, some of the largest brands, even within that, want to kind of establish their own marketplaces in a way that's a little bit more direct. So, partnering with ourselves, in a more unique way, particularly again, where they want to get that real transparency, and control over their own supply chains. I think someone mentioned procurement earlier. You know, I think that's a story that definitely can resonate with procurement teams when you're talking about controlling costs on the supply side and increasing working media. So especially brands that are kind of taking control of their own technology contracts, they've definitely started to ask that question: how can we build a marketplace?
Yeah, similar. We've had brands approach us directly, particularly when they have large sets of data that they don't want to share with or can't share with other partners. So that's just to add to that question.
Do you want to go with your question?
20 if you want.
Just one.
Sorry. So for transparency, I work for an independent DSP. We've been doing curation for like 4 years or so, so it's nothing new. However, with this kind of new wave of it being the latest thing, everyone talked about curation. Last year was all MFA, right? Does the panel think that there's a danger here in supply quality when you're looking to fuel the thirst for engagement points to feed this curation thirst, right? Which means that, because I look at all your sellers JSON files, right? And I'm starting to see a decrease in quality, pointless resellers. And the answer that always comes back from my contact person is, oh, it's to fuel curation and engagement opportunities. So how are you actually moderating and improving the supply? Or are you going to use curation as an excuse to start culling suppliers?
Who wants to take that? I like that question.
Yeah, and I think it just comes down to like what the buyer's really looking for, right? And there's a whole load of curation partners are out there, and it might be a data partner that of course has their own data. It might be someone that's using their own algorithm, for example, for performance. And it's really then down to the buyer as to like what they're looking for, and does that partner add value? I think with curation, particularly if you're working directly with the SSP to build your own marketplace as a buyer, you're really just looking for how can I get as close to the supplier as possible without having, an SSP that is calling another SSP, which is calling another SSP, really trimming down on the tech tax and just making sure as much is going on working media as possible. So yeah, really down to the buyer to kind of justify and define what it is exactly that they're going to look for in the market.
I think on our side, our supply quality guidelines haven't changed. We continue to invest in our direct relationships with our publishers and work with very few intermediaries, and that's not going to change. We want to enable marketplaces to access premium supply, which I think is key, because ultimately the better quality supply, the better outcomes it does drive, because the users are truly there to engage with the I guess website, as opposed to MFA. We all know MFA doesn't, like, sure, it may drive clicks, but it's not actually driving true outcomes, which I think is key.
We may have time for one final question. I think there's one at the back. Nicole.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, with DSPs like The Trade Desk launching access to marketplaces with a tick of a box like the SP 500+, do you see other buying platforms adopting this type of easy access to curation? And will this be used as an alternative by buyers versus working directly with SSPs?
I don't think curation replaces DSPs. I think the point about sell-side decisioning is more an equilibrium in the market as opposed to a replacement. A DSP is still going to exist, and all of the different programs that a DSP build are still going to be there and useful to some buyers. I think you mentioned earlier, it's very much about like, well, how big is the buyer? What are they buying and what are their intentions? So I think the answer is no, it's still going to exist and we're still going to coexist. And that's the way to have a very efficient ecosystem, but one that works for both buyers in mind and one that works primarily as a supply side technology with publishers in mind.
I mean, just speaking to my experience in Microsoft, we're obviously a media owner and a publisher, as well as an ad technology provider. So I think we have a bit of experience, doing both. We actually use our own curation platform to push media packages and curated deals that we've made of our own supply and our own third-party publishers that sit on our monetized SSP into DSPs like The Trade Desk. So we do see that as something that will continue, and an easy way for them to activate on deals to get them high quality supply. Then there's the larger buyers, as I think we've been talking to here, which will really want to get hands-on keys with the technology and actually lean into building their own marketplaces. And that's the bit that I think will start to increasingly happen, on the sell side outside of the DSP.
One final word. I think the the trade desk initiative is a great initiative in general, but it's also kind of a simplistic approach. It's kind of easy to buy from the top 500 publishers, top tier 1 publishers. I mean, it's almost like an inclusion race, right? The complementarity of what Curation can bring it to the table is actually discover content that is not easily findable in the marketplace, right? I mean, the tier 2 publishers that have quality content can be discovered if you can actually onboard those publishers directly and understand the quality of their placement, and then potentially package that to provide additional and complementary type of supply. So I think those two things go together, but one doesn't replace the other one. I think they are complementary again.
Cool. I think we're out of time. So thank you very much to my panel.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mary Claire, and to the panelists for these really insightful knowledge pieces. And yeah, curation is a major shift for the industry, as we learned. But now we go to our final session of the day. We turn to a topic that sparks a lot of attention recently, attention itself. So attention is the metric of the moment. And the question is, how do we move from hype to real world? I hope that our final moderator, Chloe Nichols, head of EdTech at IB Europe, and her panelist can answer this question. So please indeed pay attention also for the last session. Give some big round of applause to Chloe.
Thank you.
And
Lovely to see
to the people in front of the screens, don't forget to ask your questions in the little Q&A box. And with that, I hand it over to you, Chloe.
Thank you very much. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I would love to welcome to the stage, first of all, Anya Libova, who's the Senior Director of Publisher Sales at Double Verify. And we also have Lucy Wallace, who's Head of Programmatic at Publicis Next. And Lauren Dick, who's the Managing Director of Media and Commerce at Mail Metro Media. Great, thank you. Oh. Sure, everyone's keen also to get to the drinks afterwards, so we're going to jump right in. And just to kick things off, to what extent do you all feel that attention metrics are really influencing decisioning today? And has that weight that's been placed on attention, it's been such a big topic for years now, has it grown in the past 6 months to 1 year, would you say?
Lucy can start. Yeah, I can talk a little bit to this. So yes, it's influencing. Yes and no to it's influencing decisions. I think it's ultimately it's a hot topic. Programmatic is full of them. There's constant change, and that's why I love being in the industry. But attention itself is kind of one lever that we can pull to improve performance, and our intention should always be to deliver client growth and client success. To the question about the last 6 months, I think it's been a conversation for the last couple of years, but I do think in the last 6 months it's been easier than ever to test attention, and like anything, it takes time to get from kind of testing and conceptual through to like strategic implementation. I think I've seen more like real-time testing of attention in the last kind of 6 months to a year, just I think because of the ease. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I would say we have seen enough data to very firmly say that improved attention does bring outcomes across the full funnel, and we are in the outcomes era and everyone is talking about it. So what we see is for media buyers, it is a privacy-friendly solution that can help them understand the effectiveness of the creative itself, of the targeting behind it, and of the partners that they choose to buy media from. And then for publishers, it's a way to differentiate their inventory and position it as a highly premium highly attentive one. So once those two sides both are using attention, that is just a good indication of where we're going. And to your point, it is very much at least worth of testing it. And once they do start testing it, they see the results, and therefore we've seen huge growth.
I'm sharing a mic. Yeah, I think it's the same as kind of everyone else had commented on the previous panel, in that there are a myriad of different KPIs for any different campaign, for any buy. Attention is one of those. There's definitely been a lean into testing around those sorts of solutions. And you're absolutely right. For a premium publisher, it makes sense because it leans into sort of all of our USPs in terms of time spent and engagement. But I would say that it isn't that we're suddenly seeing huge amount of money move into testing attention. I think, as with all these things, buzzwords, as you said, the rhetoric tends to be quite far ahead of actual buying. So whilst it's great to lean in, we still haven't seen sort of all of the dollars start to flow that way. And that would be great. But I think that it will always be this myriad of like what's important to one, what's valuable to one will not necessarily be to the other. So from a publisher perspective, and actually anyone on the sell side, we're trying to sort of like, how do you hedge your bets and make sure that you're balancing what's valuable to all your clients?
Yeah. Oh no, I do. Luckily I have one. Just to touch on that as well, is there any other, you mentioned the ability to, incorporate and use attention as a metric now, and testing, and it seems as though once someone starts testing, they see the success and the value of it. Is there any other reason why you think it's maybe come to the fore more recently?
Well, the ease of testing, but I also think it's what clients want of us as an agency, right, is to be like forward thinking on all of these industry topics and be able to come with a point of view and on what the next 6 months, a year, 18 months brings. Yeah, so I think there's a leaning in of clients into like programmatic industry topics as well has driven some of that.
I would also say that we kind of as an industry, thankfully, moved on from some of the core metrics that became a bare minimum. I would say any media buyer, wherever they're buying, are expecting that their advert would be seen by a real human in an environment that is appropriate for that ad to be in. And then the media buyers are asking further questions as to how they can differentiate their buys one from another and decide which media owner is performing better. And that's where things like attention come in, because it offers a further insight also into how the creative itself performs, rather than just how many people have seen it or how many people have clicked on it.
Yeah, and by that logic, you'd expect that in sort of 18 months, 24 months from now, attention is table stakes, and it becomes something that's just part and parcel of, in the same way that you need it to be compliant, you need it to be in view, you need it to be delivering to a human, like all of the things that have just become absolutely standard, bare minimum in terms of delivery. I think at the moment there's this sort of like, it's still perceived to be this additional value layer add-on, and actually it's something that we should be demanding from any buy, particularly when you're buying a premium environment, to warrant that attention. But as with all of these things, there's going to come down to, there's a proxy for value which is determined by price, there's a proxy that's determined by trading, by environment, by actually what you want to deliver in terms of outcomes. And we see this all the time, where what we're told by the buyer in terms of what they're optimizing to has in no way any correlation to what they're actually optimizing to. And that's still the case now.
And do you think, sorry, this is also a side note, but just want to pick up on that interesting point. Do you think we're, seeing better alignment of incentives with attention? Do you think there's been that shift, or is it still coming? Maybe Lucy, you'll know.
What do you mean by alignment of incentives?
So just in terms of, we're mentioning that we've been doing the bare basics, measuring the bare basics for a while, but are we now seeing a move beyond that to kind of really focus on, I've even heard of things like attentive, what's it called, CPMs and things like that. Do you really see that actually taking off, or is it still fairly nascent still?
Yeah, I do think ACPM was an acronym I learned last year and a half ago. I think it's important for us not to get like tunnel vision. I think there does seem to be a new metric every year. in terms of how important that is, to my point earlier, I think it's one of many things that we should be looking at, and we should avoid kind of funneling straight into attention is the only thing that we should be aiming for.
I love that. Great. Okay. And then how do you think kind of high attention environments fare against others, just in terms of, you know, the value today, and how a publisher strategy is being affected? This is for publishing.
Yeah. I mean, so we live and breathe how much time people are spending on our site, what they're doing. That determines everything from where the headline goes, where the image goes, where the ad slot goes, where the ad map gets changed to. So all of that is optimizing towards engagement. Engagement is a proxy in this case for attention and time spent and all of the things that would be the inputs to an attention metric. So yes, it's incredibly important for our ads offering, but more so it's important to our UX on site. So there's a huge amount, and to the, can't remember how he's just said it a minute ago, in terms of like, we've kind of got the bare basics, and almost now there's a bigger shift change, like how do we do less to make sure that we're doing less but more valuable? And that is true with the signals that we push out, how we sort of package and sell our data, how we think about attention, because if everything has that as part and parcel of what we're selling, then we have to start to actually deliver on performance and deliver on outcomes and make sure it's an optimized UX. And all of those things refine the process, and why it's really important for us to work with the buy side to get to that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, sorry.
I've got something to add for the previous question and the one that you just asked. You know, we talked about being a proxy, not being a proxy. It can't really be a proxy until everyone has the same definition of attention, and it cannot be the currency unless all of us see this currency as exactly the same thing, right? Like we all see a value of a pound as a value of a pound, but attention and definition of it really depends on who is talking and what their experience of testing what platform has been in the past. So that needs to happen, and that language has to be aligned between the two sides for this to become, in 18 months, that thing that everyone expects. But I obviously work with a variety of publishers rather than being publisher myself. And what I see a lot is that publishers now can kind of use it in two ways. One is obviously sales. They differentiate their offering from others, especially news publishers, because what we found is attention is over 10% higher in news inventory. And news inventory, I would say historically, has been suffering a little bit from some of the buyers avoiding it. So that really helped. So that had really helped to bring that back. So we worked with a number of our partners to basically help them build that narrative and calculate this research around attention. But they also use it as a way to optimize campaigns in real time, because they no longer have to necessarily rely on an advertiser partner to give them the result of the campaign in real time, so that they have enough time to change something. If they have their own view of how that's performing, then they possibly can optimize while the campaign is live and align further with the advertiser.
Right. Brilliant.
You're absolutely right on the proxy. Sorry, you're absolutely right on the proxy point, in terms of everybody has a different definition. Everybody's working to different standards, so it's very hard to standardize what is a programmatic automated transaction against it. But I do think that the language around it, in terms of, as you've just said, premium environment and associating value to those environments, is something that is a really key sales message. And actually, outside of some of the tech scans that we do, a lot of our real-time analytics is actually more for editorial than anything else. It does translate back through to first-party data signals. But they are probably the most obsessed with heat maps and what that looks like on the page, which is their attention metric. But that in no way correlates to a programmatic key value.
Yeah.
Yet.
And we kind of touched upon standardization, that disparity, but what do you kind of see as the most impactful challenges that's happening in terms of modeling attention? Is it, is it standards? Is it the research? Is it the signals?
Yeah, so we were speaking about standardization of kind of how we're looking at kind of what counts as attention, and that's a thing that's been on my mind across the board. But also the attention measurement up until now has been really reliant on signals, right? Like signals, you mentioned time in view, what type of interaction a user is taking on an ad. Are they zooming in? Are they playing? Are they switching that, turning their phone around? And from a buyer's perspective, those signals don't always correlate with sales. We've seen various studies. I mean, there was one from Meta and Playground XYZ a few months back about the time spent. I have a bugbear with time spent on screen, but the time spent with an ad, if you see multiple bursts of shorter time interaction, that's 21% more effective than if you had that whole same period of time in one burst. And I've seen countless campaigns where I've optimized towards traffic, and those clicks don't correlate with sales ultimately. So I think there's the reliance on signals, but I think it undervalues and doesn't see enough the impact of the creative message itself. I'm a fundamental believer of we should be like earning attention rather than buying it. And we're getting there now. I think we're seeing more of the impact of the creative message itself with, AI modeling. Companies like Neurons, they're doing all sorts now. So I think we're getting there. But I think until now, there's been the standardization challenge of what we classify as an attentive view. And it's been too reliant on signals and not valued the creative itself enough.
I would agree with that. I think it's really, at the moment, we've got almost like a siloed funnel top to bottom, where attention is really a brand metric about how you capture, how you engage, and everything is kind of associated to that. And then this is really, really horribly generic, like I'm massively simplifying this, but at the bottom you've got everything that's data, performance, retail media, everything sort of sits at that lower funnel. And it's only now that we're starting to see actually retail media offerings are looking forward to the previous panel, looking for curation, looking for offsite, looking for non-endemic opportunities, looking for what that expansion looks like. How do we know more about our customers? How do we build those profiles? How do we ultimately build bigger scalable commercial solutions? And that same thing is true with everything that is a sort of media metric that you associate with brand, and that upper funnel needs to also be something that, if it's going to have any value to a buy, has to be something that you can pick out all the way through, in the same way that using sort of really, really niche sales data can be used to fulfill something further up the funnel, and kind of vice versa. So you have this sort of like perfect two-way street almost. And I think that there's a couple of examples. I think it's Co-op have just done an attention for retail media. So we're starting to see that shift where actually something that has been really performance and really data driven and really focused on sales and outcomes and everything you'd expect is starting to think about sort of those other more brand metrics. And I think that's where you'll get this perfect virtuous circle of everything coming together. But then everyone will have their own MMM, so it will look completely different for everyone. So no standards will apply.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I already touched upon standardization and the fact that there isn't really any of it at the moment. So that is a problem. And unless that is fixed, then I don't think the buyers would really adopt it further, because if you want to measure attention across the board, you need to make sure that you can measure attention across the board, whether it is a proprietary platform, social, retail, media, or an open web publisher. So that needs to be possible technically, which is quite difficult. And if it is based on signals, those signals have to be available, and not all platforms are super open about sharing them. So aligning the methodology, a gold standard of what attention is across the board, for us is key. And I've personally seen some companies that would just randomly give you a number and say, this is your attention score, without any further explanation. And those just create more problems than solve. So that's where we look at it as transparency and standardization. And that's what we want to achieve across channels and formats.
Brilliant. And I love that attention should be earned and not bought as well.
I think that's really important though, because the challenge with standardization, which I know obviously a room of programmatic buyers and everyone in this ecosystem has a real, and like we've all been bitten by this, has a real, there's a distinct possibility that it could end up being a bit of a race to the bottom. So trying to hold on to what's unique rather than just sort of plow into blanket standardizations is that sort of push-pull for publishers, where they want to understand how they can well, certainly for speaking for us, we want to understand how we can transact at scale. We want to understand how we can assign visible value metrics to all of our signals. But at the same time, like, how do you weigh that up with actually like the value, particularly when it comes to content, whether that's branded content, whether that's editorial content, whether that's video, social, whatever that looks like. And there is that kind of push-pull of like, actually, what do we hold back from everyone being able to see so that we retain that value and so that we have got the opportunity to earn that user engagement and all of the other signals that we look at as our attention metrics. But I mean, I don't have the answer to that. That's the balancing act that we're trying to find.
Cool. And I was just going to ask, I know you touched upon this as well just as a second ago, but it is kind of optimizing towards attention, delivering better outcomes compared to, strategies focused on more traditional KPIs, would you say?
Sorry, I've given you lots of yes and no answers. And again, yes and no. I think ultimately, as buyers, we should be going for the client success and client growth metrics, not necessarily getting this tunnel vision, like I mentioned, and only going for attention.
Yeah.
And I see the natural tendency to run with it, right? This is a new, sexy, attentive CPM metric. We want to like explore that and try and go for it. Especially in the context of an ecosystem where your post-click, post-impression conversions are seeing less and less visibility, or we're seeing less and less visibility there. I can see that I can see why it's something that you want to chase. But I think fundamentally the measurement of attention is where it should stop. And then we use that information to align our video buying, our display buying towards attention, but there's going to be a tailored like positioning or roadmap for every client that we work with, trying to balance all of the other levers that we have to pull that are aligning us towards client growth. That might be looking at DSPs, partners, placement sizes, all of these kind of things, which will have different amounts of attention, and however we standardize that, like is up to the partner we're using. And then there's the opportunity to use things like custom bidding algorithms and scripts to align our buy more towards those high impact and high attention placements. I think that should be the goal, right, of every programmatic buyer, is like reducing the rubbish. I should make some t-shirts for my team. But yeah, our goal is ultimately client growth. We'll avoid the tunnel vision, and we'll optimize it towards it to an extent, aligning our video and display buying towards attention placements, but that's not the only thing that we're looking for.
And sorry, I was going to ask another question, but maybe, do you want to answer on that? Yeah. Well, just to say that on that point, are there should campaigns all be, we don't want to get this tunnel vision, and we don't necessarily want all campaigns to be focused on attention, and without simplifying things, are there specific situations in which it's kind of more or less important?
Are there situations where attention is more or less important?
Maybe environments. Maybe that's a bit harder to say.
Yeah, I think there's going to ultimately be a difference between brand and performance campaigns, right? Where performance campaigns will be more focused on that end goal CPA, and perhaps we can take some of that cost for those highest attention placements. Will be more suitable for a brand kind of campaign where we're looking for impact. I think there'll always be that push-pull between brand and performance and the levels of attention that we want to optimize for.
One of the things that we have done is, rather than buy against attention, you can back calculate it to an attentive CPM, but we've done, I think it's 3 or 4 years worth of sort of twice annual research to say, exactly to your point, like what are the guiding principles of this in conjunction with this, or this format, or this many exposures. So we do have things that we can then, so we do have, firstly, a set of principles that we can explain why they drive up pure attention metrics, even though you can't buy against that as an attentive CPM. And then on the flip side of that, you can be like, well, there's then a sliding scale to say, but depending on your KPI, like if you want to just do, you own everything on the page, and that's kind of at your takeover end, all the way through to like, but if you're really trying to drive sales, then don't do that, because what you're trying to do is like you can afford to lose on attention to win more on effective reach, effective scale and outcomes. So I think we're definitely starting to see traction with like, how do you find that meet in the middle and that approach to a more modeled effect, but it is still sort of quite holistic rather than trying to do it in real time and optimize. It's quite difficult to do that in the same way when really it ends up being that they want to optimize to sales, or they want to optimize to a specific audience or specific format. So it's still that balancing act out.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, from my perspective, attention is not a KPI, right? It's just a whole myriad of KPIs, and depending on the methodology, the one that I work with is sort of 50 plus of them. So you can't really optimize towards the whole thing. Like you have to kind of choose which one you go with. And broadly, it's sort of either exposure or engagement, and then that is just the different sides of the funnel. So to your point, if it's performance, then you're looking at one thing. If it's branding, you're looking at another thing, and one will be naturally less relevant. But that again comes back to the definition of attention and who's calculating it and how. So yeah, for me, it's not one KPI.
Great. I'm conscious we want to get some questions from the audience, but I just have one final question. Predictions for attention over the next, let's say, few years, because, you know, beyond 5 to 10 years, I think we can't even guess.
I would say that there will be IAB gold standard for attention, or multiple definitions, perhaps one more deterministic, one more probabilistic. So one is more on signals, one is more, I don't know, eye tracking or something along those lines. But that standard will be set, and that standard will be agreed amongst parties. So you will no longer find companies that in 2 months become attention companies from never being them before. And then when that happens, then everyone is going to be talking the same exact language. And this is where more platforms would allow you to buy on attention or optimize towards attention, and just make it easier to understand what is it that you're actually talking about.
Ooh, predictions for attention. I think I'd go back to my creative point about I would hope there's a better understanding within media agencies and with our relationships with clients around the impact of the creative message itself. And I'd like to see us put more pressure on this earning attention rather than buying it piece on our creative agencies and the companies we work with, to make sure we've got things like distinctive brand assets and message up front and all of those standards. Yeah, I'd hope to see a bigger conversation about creative for attention.
Yeah, I agree with both those points. I definitely think we'll get to some sort of standard guiding principles. I also think that we should be using attention to shape client messaging. And I actually think that, just to sort of complete the set, attention will become more of a defining characteristic of the platform and the environment and the content that you're in. And I mean, if I think about like the fragmentation of our traffic, attention, because it's not quite the same as how we're looking at it, but like time spent, engagement, are all the core metrics that we're looking at when we're creating content, and actually really at a much higher level deciding where to prioritize our time and focus in what we create for. So I think it will become partly I think it will become table stakes in like, we have to be able to deliver this, but I think it will be bought under a set of principles, and hopefully clients will lean into different messaging to drive attention.
Thank you. Do we have any questions online that we want to, or we want to go to the audience?
Thanks. We talked a lot about standardization with attention partners. How reliant do you think we are on social channels and walled gardens and fenced gardens? I love that phrase, by the way. Because without them opening up, obviously we have eye tracking, but we're talking about creatives, right? So you got DCO, thousands of creatives. How likely is a panel to be able to measure that effectively? If they're not opening up, how are we ever going to have a ubiquitous currency you can trade on? Sorry, Anya, that was tough.
I work with Bauer. Listen, social has not been easy with measurement from the beginning of social. They're not the easy platforms to open up and get anyone to come into their home and try and check their business. That's just not what they do, and that's not what their principles are, and that's not how they operate. Having said that, it's the advertiser's budget and advertiser interest that force platforms, whoever these platforms are, to open up and to start following the rules and playing nice to the rest of the industry. That's how we originally came to measuring viewability on socials, because it's not like they used to just be like, okay, come in. It's only because the Procter & Gamble's and Unilevers of this world were like, well, you got to do it or we're not going to spend with you. So ultimately, the marketers are the ones that dictate the rules of the game. So I think that that's gonna be what happens in this scenario again. And we have seen this already, right? A lot of the attention vendors out there do measure attention on social in different ways. Most of them don't do it on an impression level at the moment because the social platforms restrict that from happening. But there are a couple that do, and there will be more possibly going forward. But I'm going to be looking at agencies and buyers to bully the social media giants.
I'll have to take that up with my social team in the Publicist. But yeah, I see what you're saying in that it does sometimes come down to who are the ones holding the purse strings, basically, to put pressure on those companies.
It's also fair to say that they're not reliant on open market CPMs and programmatic trading. They've got their own ecosystem, their own set of metrics. So I think, again, it will be a balancing act. I think they'll probably get to a point where they'll allow something, they'll allow a set of standards and principles for social ecosystems that ladder up to whatever is set as a gold standard. But I don't think we'll ever get to, oh yeah, you can just run whatever you want and we'll have one standard set of principles that works in every environment. And that's the beauty of it, I guess.
Yes. Oh, we've got one back.
So this is a bit rough in my head, but we're seeing the gap between brand and performance closing gradually. And here there is attention, outcome, curation. Is there a way we can basically link attention to curation? And I speak from an end user point of view, where it's like I've paid attention to a certain ad, say on TV, for example, because it's a nice creative or nice storytelling, but doesn't really mean I'm going to convert in a way, right? In terms of how we define attention in itself, is there a way we can ensure as an industry that we're working with creating partners as well to make sure that not just driving high attention numbers, but also the right audience in the right platform are paying attention as well to drive outcomes?
I think that you have talked to three key areas and missed attribution, which is exactly what would tie all of that together. And there is no standards for attribution. Everybody has a different view of it. And what we did used to stitch it to has been removed. So I think that comes with a completely new, like, technically, should we? Yes. Technically, like, should we be trying to do that? Yes. Can we do that? Yes, if you stitch together a lot of different things or you work in isolation and a retailer allows you to put a single pixel down, you get that whole view. Like, we can get to that, but that is so clunky. And at the moment, you'd have to do that step by step with each different partner, each different buyer, each different retailer. But I think that potentially we come back next year and attribution is one of the topics, because we've gone, okay, we actually all do need to get together to do this, because otherwise we're not going to see the spend funneling through to the ecosystems that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think there's a point there about working with SSP partners for curation. I think that's something we have been doing and will continue to do in terms of working with our SSP partners to curate a selection of high attention, high viewability placements. But I think it's a small part of that's a small part of the puzzle overall of how are we as agencies developing a buying strategy for our clients that works for our clients. So I think SSP curation is part of that. But there's also looking at all of our other metrics. how we're buying audiences, what optimizations we're using, like placements, DSP mix, all of that. SSP curation is one part of the wider kind of buying strategy that we pull together for clients.
Brilliant. And, oh, I knew you had to have one. I was about to ask. I was a little bit offended. There wasn't one. So great. Brilliant.
So big fan of attention measurement and opportunities, right? But do you think, as the panel here, this could be a time, or would you like to have this as a time to put a death nail into the IAB definition of viewability?
Do you want to go first?
You're welcome.
We are at the IAB event.
But it's a flawed metric.
I think if you're buying on viewability alone now, then you are missing a trick. So in terms of whether or not it's a flawed metric, that's like saying cookies are a flawed tracking. We know that, but we have to have, as an industry, we have to have moved past that and be buying against more complex strategies that tie together multiple different, to everything we've said, to the myriad of signals, to the complex MMMs that tell you what you should be buying, what your mix looks like, what your optimization. I would say we should move past buying against just viewability for sure. Whether or not I have a problem with the definition, I'm not wasting any time on that. It's 10 years old.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of the theme of this panel, I think, has been there are lots of things we can measure, and ultimately we don't want to get tunnel vision against any of them. So yeah, I think viewability is one thing across of a myriad of metrics that we can look at, and it's not something we go solely for. At least if I had a client that said we only want 90% viewability, I'd say that no. Well, I think there are too many. There are lots of clients that still rely on it and still think about it. So it's something we need to consider as part of our wider mix.
And I think to that point, I don't know if there needs to be a coffin nailed. Was that what the question? A nail in the coffin. It feels like from this conversation, though, that there has been a big shift. And I think you perfectly kind of summarize that it's, maybe not the top of our list anymore. And it feels like a lot of the industry has moved on. So I don't think it needs to be coffined, but it feels like it has. And I think, the death of anything, like the death of the cookie, which is not the death of the cookie, but it was, it's the rebirth of our industry to give way to transformation, which is what we do well.
Spend the next 5 years
Definitely. You did well. I just want to say thank you all so much for paying attention as well this afternoon and staying with us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know it was a long day already, so I'm more than happy that you stayed until the very end and also answered some very sharp questions and juicy questions. And thanks to the audience for asking these. So your applause for the last panel we had. And with that, we are now coming to the end of the H1 25 Virtual Programmatic Day. And it was truly an incredible event, I think. We covered a vast range of different topics. We spent attention until the very end of the whole kind of day. Special thanks again to the speakers, to the moderators, to the panelists for sharing so many kind of interesting and also actionable insights. And a heartfelt thank you to my friends and colleagues at the IAB Europe. Without you, this wouldn't be possible. So thank you, Helen Mussard. I think you watching us online. Thank you, Dimitris. And also thank you very much for all your colleagues doing your magic behind the scenes, like Nicola Labella, Jonna Madare, Liz Haynes, and also Lauren Wakefield. So big round of applause for our colleagues at the IAB Europe. And then, as I said, the two-day event recording will be available quite soon on our webpage. Please keep an eye out for this. You can download, revisit, and of course also share it with your colleagues. And yeah, thank you again for joining us today. As I mentioned in the beginning, And perhaps we can go on to the next slide. I'm not sure who can do the magic in here. One before that, please. Yes. So, as I said in the beginning, all the people you saw on the panels are members of IB Europe. So if you're interested to participate more, get more information, please reach out to Helen and Liz. You see the email addresses up here on screen. And then a heads up, happy for the next slide here for upcoming events. So first of all, we have the IB Europe Insights Revealed Attitudes to Retail Media report. If you're interested, register. You can use the QR code to do so. And then next slide, next event, please. That's the Retail Media Impact Summit, which is happening, I think, after the Mexico on 24th of September in Amsterdam. Again, if you're interested, you can also see all these kind of links, of course, on the IB Europe website, but you can also directly register here by scanning the QR code. And then the final thing, yes, and that is a call to action for you. Please participate in the impact of AI on digital advertising survey. You're all experts on this topic, and your insights and opinions about this are very much appreciated and help us to give some more insights back again to the industry. So thank you for your attention. That was basically it. A massive thank you to all of you. Give yourself a big round of applause. And then I'm looking forward to seeing each of you, the people here in the room, for some drinks, and everybody else for the next H2 25 Virtual Programmatic Day. Bye.